Hello, everyone. Welcome. Going to give it a few minutes while all of you jump on. We have a good amount of people registered to join us this evening, so we may wait a good 2 or 3 minutes while you all settle in, log in, we'll be adjusting your camera and mic, so no need to worry about that. We have some information on the screen, as you can see. So take a look at that while we're waiting for everyone to join us, and then we'll get started before too long. Joining you from my living room again. Last week I was actually in the office, so back in my comfort zone here with my usual background. I've kind of played around with those virtual backgrounds, and you know, they're cool and they're fun, but you sort of get that halo effect around your head, which it kind of throws me off. So you're stuck with my living room background, everyone.
Well, it's well decorated.
Say again?
But it's well decorated and has a nice
color coordinated even. While everyone's logging in, I'll just remind folks that you can use the Q&A feature on the bottom of your screen to type in any questions. We'll hopefully be answering many of those in our introductory remarks, but if not, we do provide you with that option to submit additional questions once you hear some of our information. Hopefully you got to watch the recording of the town hall from last Thursday. That's available on the families.lafayette.edu website, as this one will be. And I believe it's on the FAQ page as well now. So we'll try and do that there as well. So again, for those of you just logging in, welcome everyone. I'm Amy Blythe, Director of Parent and Family Relations. Please use the Q&A feature on your Zoom screen if you need to ask questions that aren't being answered as you hear the introductory remarks. And to kick us off this evening, please allow me the honor of introducing our President, Allison Byerly.
Thank you very much, Amy, and thanks everyone for joining us. I know that some of you will have either watched or participated in last week's town hall. We'll cover some of the same information, but also try and fold into our comments tonight and then in the Q&A, some of the questions that have already come up over the course of the last few days, either during or following last week's session. And we hope this will give you a chance to fold in some other questions and things that might be on your mind. One of the things I wanted to begin by saying is that as we think about our plans for the spring and compare them to our plans for the fall, you know, though our fall plan has worked very well and we've been very pleased with how it's gone, we do feel excited at the idea of being able to offer more students the option of coming back to campus in the spring. And so we really began our discussions as we thought about lots of different models for bringing a partial complement of students back or keeping the same population we have, you know, pros and cons to lots of different plans. But we have heard from many students, you know, how anxious they are to be back on campus, to see many of their friends, to have some classes in person. And we really wanted to try and make that possible for as many students as would like to take advantage of that. And so in all of our planning, we've looked carefully at what has been the experience of other colleges and universities, some like us, some not like us, but in particular schools that are similar in size and configuration to Lafayette, to think about what are the things that have made their plans successful. We certainly have looked most closely at testing and testing protocols and strategies, and our Vice President for Campus Life, Annette Diorio, will talk a little bit more about that. But we've also talked about processes, procedures, and even the kind of community buy-in that has really been integral to the efforts of a number of campuses, particularly those that have been successful. One of the things that you'll hear us emphasize as a theme throughout these remarks is the idea that really, in order to be successful, we will need the cooperation of everyone. That means all students, students on campus and students at home, and also families who will need to support their students in making the right decisions and in following the protocols that will be important for the health and safety of the community. And so while we all recognize that it's hard to imagine being on campus, for example, and not being able to do all the things you would normally look forward to doing on campus, it will be very important that everyone observe those rules and protocols and bear in mind that individual decisions can have consequences for the whole community. And so that is something that we'll come back to, that sense of shared responsibility, which is an important part of what we think will be integral to our efforts to succeed this spring. Another point I'd like to emphasize, just in thinking about the overall shape of our plan and kind of the timetable, is that we have tried very hard to make this announcement early enough that people could start thinking and planning for what they choose to do in the spring. A lot of students have talked about the fact that, you know, it's a lot to think about, whether they're planning to come back in the spring, whether they're planning to study from home. Certainly, we expect that some things could change between now and then, and hence students' choices might change. But in asking students to identify by November 2nd whether they thought they would be studying from home or coming to campus, we really are trying to give ourselves the best information for planning so as to be able to serve the needs of all of our students as effectively as possible. This is going to be, as you'll hear our Provost John Meier say, an iterative process with lots of information going back and forth as we both collect information from students about what they think their intentions are, and then we try and put together a course schedule that meets the needs of both students on campus and students studying from home, recognizing that while many of our courses will be remote, some will be offered in person for those who are on campus, and we want to make sure that the students studying from home also have a rich array of options for their course selection as well. And so it's helpful to us to get that information. It's also important to recognize that what we're able to put out on the way of information will be continually updated and evolving over the coming weeks and months. We don't know everything today that we will know the day we open, but I think we have a very clear picture of how we expect the semester to unfold, what the major parameters are. Some of the details will be filled in subsequently, but we recognize that people need to start thinking about what they'd like to do so that we can accommodate students' preferences, you know, as much as we possibly can. And so it's a lot to think about and a lot to absorb. That's why we've put quite extensive FAQs on the website. It's why we're doing these sessions and are doing our best to answer all the questions that you have, recognizing that all of us wish we knew more about what January would look like than we do in October. But we feel that we're planning for a wide range of contingencies, and we feel, you know, very, very confident in our plans. And so, you know, we're excited to share some of that with you and to get your feedback, hear your questions, and continue to work with you in the coming weeks and months to develop individual plans for every student that will meet their needs and their own, you know, preferences, risk tolerance, and academic needs as well as possible. So with that as a bit of a prelude, I'm going to call first on Vice President for Campus Life, Annette Diorio, to talk a bit about some of the broader kind of health dimensions, health and safety and student life dimensions. Then our Provost John Meier will talk a little bit about the academic program, and then we'll open it up to questions. Annette.
Thank you, President Byerly, and thanks to everyone who's joining us this afternoon for our second town hall. So I'm going to start by saying, you know, I'm sure that there are moments where I am going to say something and then say that could be impacted by what we see in January. And I just want to be clear that when we say iterative, you know, we obviously are sensitive to the fact that we need to adjust what we're doing based on what's happening in the world outside. So there will be an area where I'm going to talk about that in a minute, and I know it prompted a lot of questions last week. I'm going to start with testing because I know that's something that lots of folks have some questions about. So on our FAQ, we actually listed what is our baseline strategy. And I say baseline strategy because that means it won't be less than this. And again, there might be some environmental factors that change some of our approach. But we really are committed to doing a pre-arrival test. So to send students a test to take it home, then a test when they arrive, and then a couple of rounds of population level testing, and then backing back down, depending on what we see in those testing, to a percentage of monitoring tests throughout the remainder of the semester. You know, we are prepared to sort of manipulate those numbers up as we need to. So I guess what I would say to folks is, again, right now, what we're seeing is, you know, case counts are going up. So we're actually preparing our testing strategy to match what we would need to have in January. But we're really comfortable with that flexibility with our partners. The second thing that I would say is that, you know, when we think about what makes a small sort of outbreak become a large outbreak, it's really that if you don't get a quick, immediate handle on the contacts, the close contacts that students have had, we'll want to reflect on, certainly I am reflecting on the fact that the CDC changed the definition of what makes a close contact last week. So that is factoring into our new way of thinking about this. But really, you know, identifying those folks who have contact with someone who tests positive for COVID, isolating the people who test positive and quarantining fairly quickly. The others is really the way to keep something from going into a community spread event. I will sort of insert here rather than at the end of the talk, because we had some questions. So since October 15th, We have had 18 positive COVID cases on campus. I'm actually, of course, it is a double-digit number, and folks have thoughts about that when you have 700 students on campus. It seems like a larger number. It is actually a pretty contained number of students. We are just sort of running down the end of our 2-week period here. Our initial contact tracing, I believe, worked. We identified the cases through our monitoring tests. We quickly isolated and quarantined the students, and we haven't really seen cases emerge from outside the quarantine area. So I think that that's the way contact tracing is supposed to work. For all of us, we really need to get comfortable as a community asking each other to do things that might feel a little uncomfortable. And we will, of course, share resources with folks on how to gear up for that. Asking someone to put a mask on, having conversations with roommates about where your risk level falls for, what kinds of activities you're engaged with. Those are all conversations that we're going to need to have as a community. We have them every day in our homes, I believe. So we want to really carry that forward when students come to campus. Thing that I said last week that I think triggered a lot of questions and a lot of panic was about travel. So many colleges have seen when students travel away from campus that they see small outbreaks, or some even have seen large outbreaks when students return. This is a concern. We have let students travel during the fall semester. There is a mechanism for students to request that. Really, I can't give you an answer about what travel will look like in January because we don't know what the national and regional COVID outlook is going to be. So if really it isn't helpful for students to travel from campus, we need to be able to ask students to stay on campus. If we're in a position where we can sort of keep track of where students are going and that the case counts are low, that is maybe possible as it was this fall, but it's really something that we can't say for sure. So overnight travel is really the challenge. Students going to the grocery store has not been a challenge. It's, when you want to go home for the weekend, and we understand why students may want to do that or get a break or just be away from campus. But as I said, this isn't specific to Lafayette, but many colleges have experienced real sort of challenges with folks coming and going from campus. And it's a challenge for your home community as well, because a student could inadvertently import cases back into home communities. The other thing that I know brought a lot of questions last week is about housing. So I'll try to fold that into this before there's a lot of questions about it. First year students will hear from the Residence Life Office, I believe it's next week, with the information. You will get an email about how to tell us what you want to do with your housing. There is a mechanism for students to request a roommate. It can be someone you knew and had thought you were going to live with in the fall, or someone that you've met. You can also identify folks that you might like to live near. We're trying to do that for first year students so that you might be able to say, like, here are some folks who I think have the same risk tolerance as me. It won't be perfect, I will say again, but we are really committed to trying to make that work out. Upper level students should be anticipating that you're living in the space where you would have lived last fall. There will be some exceptions to that. And again, depending on the number of students who decide not to come back, we might need to move some students around to make additional space for isolation or quarantine. We have a number of spaces available, more than 100, and we are bulking that up with other spaces. So we'll have well more than that, both on and off campus, but we want to just be sure that we have enough space there. The other thing that I will just sort of mention quickly is that it's pretty clear, and we hear this from students and families alike, people really want sort of a zero tolerance for infractions, unless, of course, you are the person who's accused of the infraction. So I think we need to really talk about what's realistic from anonymous reports. We've allowed anonymous reports to come into the fall about COVID issues, and they really are challenging for us to act upon. And it is impossible to follow up with the person who filed the report, to give them a status update, to say, this is what we've done, this is where we're think this is going. So we are unlikely to continue that anonymous reporting mechanism. Students can still sort of file things and tell us, and we'll intercede. But it really is a challenge with the amount of information that we get, and balancing that with the knowledge that students asked us during the summer to sort of back down a little bit on the public safety patrols, and to be thinking about, the national climate around police violence, and particularly for our students of color. And we've tried to do that. We've taken routine patrols out of some of our residential areas and tried to be responsive there. But we do need to obviously have folks around who are looking and making sure that things are going as they're supposed to. So it is striking a balance, and we recognize that we have some work to do there with students to strike the right balance, but we're committed to finding that. I also know from both our recent cases and what we hear from other campuses, it is really hard to think about being in quarantine or isolation, certainly. We have 60 trained contact tracers who follow up with students if they're in quarantine or isolation, make sure that they're able to sort of get access to the things that they need. But I know students who've been in quarantine, several of them have said, like, I just don't want to do that again. And I understand that. We deliver meals for students in isolation, even if they're not on a college meal plan. We're not about to let our students be out there and not have food. In the same way that we test all of our students, we do COVID testing on all of our students, whether they live in our housing or not. Our students in private off-campus housing all participate in our testing program. Our students are our students, and we try very much to treat them the same. But I think it is important that you talk with your family about kind of like a quarantine plan and an isolation plan, and what can you do to make sure that you've got the things that will make you comfortable. Some families have asked, is it okay to come and get my son or daughter if they're in quarantine or isolation? It is. We need that plan worked out through the health center. We need to be sure that we're not exposing communities to a greater risk. We are absolutely committed to caring for the students here. There's no requirement that anyone come and get their son or daughter from campus. But if that is the place where you're going to feel more comfortable and family wants to come do that, we will not stand in your way. We want your student to be as comfortable as possible. So the other thing that I would say is the Counseling Center has been facilitating a weekly workshop on dealing with COVID stress. And they've got a lot of resources on the website. When thinking about what this means to potentially be quarantined and the general stress of COVID, I really would suggest that folks take a look at that website and use those resources, because I know we're all under tremendous stress from a variety of things, and it really can make things feel really overwhelming. Everything for us is about balancing risk with sort of the kind of free experience that folks come to expect on a college campus. It won't be perfect. We won't be able to have large events for students, but we can still facilitate community building. We can still give students a good experience on campus if everyone comes to the table to work together. So thank you.
Great, thank you very much, Annette. I'd like to ask John Meier to step in and talk a little bit about plans in the academic program.
Thanks, President Byerly. I have to admit the fact that both Allison and Annette used my word iterative is kind of shocking. I come out of the mathematics department, and we don't generally plant language that people pick up. So that's kind of fun, and it's knocked me off my game a little bit, but it's okay. I'll get through this. This is a quite interesting moment we're in, today in this very moment. The Lafayette faculty are deeply engaged with the current classes that they are teaching, and at the exact same time, they're putting a lot of time and effort into thinking about the spring semester and planning for that. And I would say that everything I've heard indicates that indeed, while this is a lot of work to be doing right now, they are delighted both with the interactions that they've been having with students in class this semester, and very much with the fact that we're welcoming so many students back in the spring semester. The spring semester, as I think has been mentioned a couple of times, it's not going to be a usual term at Lafayette College, and there's things we're going to need to work through, particularly on the academic front. There will be students that will need to be in quarantine from time to time. That is just what's going to happen. There's going to be cases and contact traces that pop up, and we're going to work through that. And there's also going to be a decreased density in buildings and decreased density in individual classrooms. And I did just notice a question that came in, so let me talk a little bit about that. Back in June, as we were heading toward the fall semester, we did a classroom by classroom analysis of all of our facilities, both our health and safety experts, as well as a faculty committee that had an eye towards what the pedagogy in the various rooms would look like. And we came up with much reduced capacities for all of those classrooms that sort of fit all of the various guidelines. There's also been a study of the ventilation, the airflow in the classrooms, and the registrar has worked directly with the people who did those studies in terms of building out what classes are occurring in what classrooms. So the density will be well down. It'll be about 50% of the capacity that the room would normally hold, but it wasn't a formulaic approach. It's very much dependent on the structure of the room and how it's laid out, what actually can be made feasible. So less than 50% in some particular instances. And classes will be, there will be more than one class in a classroom during the day. The gap between classes differs depending on a variety of environmental factors, not only the airflow, but issues of just how dense we want the hallways to be in particular buildings. Sometimes just the flow between classes can be a problem that we need to be taking into account. So since everybody else is saying iterative, I'm going to say iterative. The very first step in our iterative process for aligning courses and modes of instruction with critical student needs is the first draft of the course schedule. We don't usually call it a first draft, but I'm trying to double down on that word iterative. It is nearly complete. It's going to be available for students and advisors tomorrow. A notice will be going out. The advisors will have the pins that the advisees will need to register for their classes. There'll be a notice going out to the students when it's available to them. It's got about 1/3 of the courses, a little more than 1/3, are going to have a significant on-campus component. So we might as well just say those are on-campus courses. The remainder of those will be offered through remote instruction. It'll be very easy to figure out which is which. If there's a classroom assigned to a class, well, it's meeting in a classroom. And if it's labeled as remote, it's going to be a remote class. That said, I've said iterative, I said first draft. What we're going to need to do then is take a look at that, take a look at registration patterns, take a look at what students tell us about if they're going to be studying from home or studying on campus. And then we're going to have to rework that to try and align things so that we get a great collection of courses that suit the needs for all the students of Lafayette College. And that process is going to take a while. It's going to take some feedback. It's going to take students when they think they've got a class that they absolutely need to take and for some reason are blocked, which of course happens every single semester for various reasons, but probably there'll be more of those this semester. The student needs to raise his hand, tell the advisor, tell the faculty instructor, tell the department head. That'll get on our radar. We'll make some adjustments. I can't guarantee everyone's going to get the exact schedule that they would love to have, but I wouldn't guarantee that in any semester. So I know that one thing that we've heard a lot about, and frankly, it's something we've talked a lot about on campus, is what's referred to as the high flex model. This is a model where you would have both students in the classroom on campus and students taking the course remotely simultaneously. There actually was a great article in today's Chronicle of Higher Education that outlined a variety of the stresses and strains connected to high flex instruction. I think the very short version of that is sometimes it works, and it will be happening in some occasions at Lafayette next semester, but it is really difficult to sort of have the all right, I'm stuck on the word now. The interactive classroom experience that students and faculty enjoy at Lafayette College, where you've got this direct faculty and student response and student-student interchange that's going on. If you're trying to simultaneously work with the students who are in the classroom in front of you and work with the students who are filling up the Hollywood squares of your Zoom feed. Frankly, the course design for a face-to-face class and the course design for a distance class are different. And the ways in which you can build classroom communities in those two environments is different, and is really difficult to braid them together into something that's truly successful. So what we want is we want the students who are on campus to have some very good, wonderful on-campus opportunities. We want everybody to be able to fill out a schedule that is going to meet their needs and bring them a great collection of courses. And like I say, that's going to take a little bit of time for us to work through. So, finally, I guess I will conclude that campus this spring is going to be even more animated than it has been this fall semester. That's as it should be. But it is going to be the case that we are going to have some awkward moments as we work through a variety of things. There's going to be changes that need to be made. And I would say the entire community needs to enter into it, understanding that that sort of adjustment is going to be happening from now until the start of the semester and after the semester starts, depending on what environmental factors present themselves.
Great, thank you very much, John. That's very helpful. I think we're ready to take some questions from the Q&A. Amir, do you want to throw a couple questions our way?
Sure. Let's do the couple of questions on housing first, if I can bring Annette back up. Dr. Diorio, questions around fraternities and sororities and how those living arrangements will continue. And then questions about the dining plan, how that might work. And then finally, if students were already in fall housing, I'll go back. Let's just start with that. The dining plan and sororities and fraternities. Sorry.
All right. I was getting ready to write them down so that I wouldn't forget. Okay, so let me start with dining, because I think I saw that question in the chat. So a couple things. So students on campus do carry a meal plan. In our students in private off-campus housing this fall, they were exempt from having a meal plan, but everybody else has some combination of a meal plan. Dining has the ability to do many things: sit down, grab and go. They have a mobile app. They have a lot of options for students to get food in a capacity that suits their needs. They meet all dietary needs, and sometimes that means that they're doing it with the chef sort of really customizing for a particular person, something that is very particular to them, and they order that. And then sometimes it's broader context like gluten or peanut allergies or things like that. But we do expect that students will have all of those options available to them. I will say this fall, the most popular options have been students taking food or eating from the food truck and sitting on the quad. In the middle of the winter, that might be a little bit colder, so we may not get as many students sitting on the quad, but I do think that the ability to grab food and go has been particularly helpful for students. Dining has extensive protocols for how they clean the seating. There's plastic barriers up on their tables. So they do have that sort of end of the spectrum pretty well under control. Housing, and particularly fraternity and sorority housing, we do expect students to live in the house where they're assigned. And while certainly I can appreciate that it feels like those are riskier environments, that is an opportunity for these organizations to really sort of get their leadership together and talk about what they're going to do in their facility. All of the houses, all fraternities, all sororities have resident advisors in them. So they all have the same sort of oversight in that capacity. But fraternities and sororities generally sort of manage their own environment. The houses that we own, we clean, we have supervision in those houses. The houses that we don't own, there's 3 of them, they are responsible for their own cleaning, and we have worked with them. We've received COVID mitigation plans from each of the house corporations. So those are all on file with us now.
If a student is already living here the fall, can they move into their spring dorm before they return home?
Oh, they're going to have to. So right now in the fall, and Residence Life has started this communication with students, although it hasn't quite gotten to that level about, hey, before you leave, please be sure to do this. Our students who are here in the fall, many of them are in rooms that are, of course, assigned to other folks for the spring because they are not in their normal assignment. And so we'll need to move all those students around before they leave for November, get those rooms cleaned up where they were, and be ready to go for the spring semester.
And then, Annette, there's just a general question around move-in. How will you be able to keep families safe as they move in? Will parents be able to be involved in that? And then if you could talk a little bit about the quarantine process, if you were flying in or driving in from different states, how you see that.
Yeah, so I can tell you what we did for quarantine in the fall, but honestly, there are different ways that schools approach quarantine. And I think really we're going to need to get a better sense of what areas are requiring quarantine in January before I could give you solids on that. Basically, because right now there's 14 states on the quarantine list, and they're pretty much all flying, places people would fly from for the most part. But if, for example, New Jersey and New York ended up on the quarantine list, and X percentage of our students are from New Jersey and New York, that might actually transfer us to a different kind of quarantine situation where we had everybody in hold for a couple of weeks, as was the case in some schools in New York, including Colgate and some other schools, where they actually just, brought everybody to campus. Driving is always likely to be somewhat better than flying, because, you can sort of manage that in a smaller vehicle. The airplanes have their own sort of challenges with the way air recirculates in them, but wearing a mask on an airplane is a good thing to do. In terms of families helping students move in, this is one of these places where we have to balance risk and what folks want, right? So in the fall, we did allow a family member, one or two, I think we allowed in the fall, but we were well under occupied. Whether that would be one or two to actually go into the residence hall, we're not as concerned about both family members coming to campus with the student, but we are concerned about how many people we bring into the residence hall at a particular time and how many different people go into residence hall. We'll stagger the move-in times as we did in the fall to try to not have both roommates and both sets of parents showing up at the same time, and then you're negotiating a small space. So that's how we plan to manage that.
And will parents be able to visit during the semester currently?
So this fall, we didn't allow anyone into our residence halls, and that is likely to be held through the spring. I do not see why we would change that. So parents have come to take their son or daughter out to dinner in the area. They've walked around the quad. They've done things outside. That has been working well for us. And I think we would continue that. We don't really want to do anything that encourages more folks into the residential areas or the other academic buildings than is necessary. Now, again, this is something that could change. If we end up with a huge spike nationally and, we're in a position where we're really trying to severely limit folks coming to campus, then we might again say, no coming to campus. The other thing we did in the fall, which we're likely to repeat again, is the first 2 weeks of the semester, we really didn't allow students to cross visit between residence halls. We didn't want families coming to campus and visiting during that time period so that we could get through all of the population testing and know what we had for our students.
Okay, I'll give you a break and ask the provost to come back and answer some questions around the academic calendar. So Provost Meier, if you could enlighten us to, how the academic calendar is shaping up and what our spring break plans look like.
Oh yeah, that's so I would say there are two big variables that the faculty are currently discussing, the start date and spring break, and I think that's exactly the right things to be looking at. I would say that no one's looking at the semester starting earlier, but as at least one person commented in a question, there have been a number of institutions that have moved their start dates to later in the year, further into the spring. So that is something that the faculty is currently thinking very hard about in concert with all our health and safety experts. There is also the issue of spring break. As I think folks can imagine, a week-long break in the middle of the semester is a wonderful thing from a variety of viewpoints, including everyone's mental health, to give them a break in the midst of the 14 weeks of instruction. On the other hand, there is some risk involved there in terms of people traveling and either bringing things from College Hill elsewhere or picking up things elsewhere and then bringing them back to College Hill. So a variety of proposals on what might be the spring break are currently under consideration. All of that will be settled by mid-November. It would be wonderful if we'd actually had that settled already. I'm the first one to admit that, but that's how long the process is going to take. The nature of the calendar depends on the nature of the experience, and so we really needed to settle first what it is that we were doing in terms of inviting students back to campus before we could engage too deeply in the calendar question. I think I hit everything there, Amir.
You did. Now the next question is probably what is most prevalent perhaps in the chat, and that's really this question of why will some courses be truly in person and therefore cannot be taken by students remotely? And on top of that, a question around, or mixed with that, the question around how will we support or accommodate students who would be in quarantine even if they are on campus taking in-person classes? Great.
So yes, so we currently have, like I said, about a third of the courses that are in the schedule are intended to be on-campus courses. Some of those may end up in that high flex format, which I mentioned before, but everyone should presume that those are on-campus courses. they're primarily being taught on campus because they're have components to them that are absolutely critical to occur. The experiential components, the laboratory component, a studio component in an art class, things like that. And so those will be on-campus courses. That iterative process is where we're really going to identify where some of the pinch points are with that. And in terms of accommodate during quarantine, this is a great one, because there is a real difference between accommodating students that can't be in the class for say 10 days, not 10 class days, but 10 weekdays, versus someone who's going to be participating in the class remotely for the entire course of the semester, with all of the various assignments and interactions needing to occur through a remote setting. Those are two separate things. I think the solutions that people are going to have, well, there's two things I can say. One, it's going to be a tailor-made solution that fits the nature of the course. Some of them will just be recordings of the class, sharing of lecture notes, special office hours for people who are in quarantine to go over the material. There's a variety of things, and they really have to fit the nature of the course in order to be truly effective. Those are all going to be articulated in the faculty members' syllabus at the start of the semester, so it won't be any shock to anybody who's in the course as to how they will be able to continue their participation in the class while they're in quarantine.
Thank you so much. A question for you, President Byerly, and that is around the sports schedule or the decisions of the Patriot League. If you could talk a little bit about what the timeline is for the Patriot League to make decisions, that would be helpful for a lot of parents to understand that.
Sure. The Patriot League has been meeting, the Council of Presidents has met a number of times over the course of the semester to discuss both, the decisions made already about fall sports and looking ahead to winter and spring seasons. I will say that because different campuses are operating differently and not all have announced what their spring plans will be, the Council of Presidents has been by and large encouraging the athletic directors to plan for a variety of scenarios without committing to any specific scenario in terms of what winter, spring, or even fall sports move to spring might look like. All of those things have been under discussion. We have meetings coming up in the next week where there will be continued discussion of those, but I couldn't say what I think a decision date would be on those, because except to say that the general principle has been to try and leave options open, because it's much easier to say no to something early than it is to say yes to something early. That is, if we wanted to completely rule out a lot of options, you could make that decision and move on. If we want to keep our options open, allowing a few more weeks to go by to find out exactly how many schools will be fully open in the spring, how many schools have travel policies that would make it difficult to correlate with, student athlete travel. The athletic directors have been looking at things like modified schedules that focus on league play. There's already been a decision made that the basketball season would start, if it starts no earlier than January 1st, and that it would consist of Patriot League play only, with the exception of Army and Navy. And so those are the kinds of decisions that have been on the table. Questions about how broad a schedule, what distance of travel, could overnight travel be involved, or limit to non-overnight travel, which obviously would have a significant effect on who you can compete with. All of those things are still up in the air. So we recognize that student athletes and certainly their families and friends, would like to have more certainty about what's going to happen. But having noticed in the Q&A that several people have pointed out that, in preparing for the fall, we made a plan and then had to change our plan to meet circumstances. We're really trying our best to avoid having a lot of changes where we can avoid them by not committing too early to a plan if we feel we're too far in advance of the information we would need. So I would say at a minimum, making sure that we fully understand what each campus's spring semester is going to look like, probably will precede any final decision on what spring athletic competition might look like if it occurs.
Thank you. Sticking with the athletic questions, Annette, can you talk a little bit about how student athletes will be housed, when they might return to campus should the season commence?
Well, some of them are already here. So certainly both of our both our men's and women's basketball teams are here participating in practices. Student athletes are not housed together as student athletes, right? So they are in their regular assignment. First-year students will live with other first-year students, some of whom are athletes and some of whom not. Many athletes have a roommate who's another athlete by a selection that they have made. But but we aren't housing the athletes together in sort of particular buildings or in pods necessarily. The spring athletes, really, once the Patriot League makes a determination on the schedule, we'll do the move in then. So if we need to move students in at some time during January, we will take care of that and do all that. There's a 6-week progression for the NCAA for sport performance, and we'll be sure we're taking care of all of those things before the season would be scheduled to start.
And if I could just jump in for a second and say, and that of course is a part of the Patriot League planning, that is the recognition that whatever start dates we might imagine need to have adequate time and preparation for not only planning of schedules, but also for, the move-in period and the training period that precedes, according to NCAA rules, any competition.
Annette, thinking about the more macro view, can you talk a little bit about what you feel has changed between our plan for the fall and the spring, and why we're confident we can now bring the majority of our students back to campus?
Oh, sure. So, in the summer, what we saw was really a confluence of a couple of factors. There was a bit of fragility in the testing pipeline, combined with a real spike in COVID cases in the 18 to 22-year-old range in particular. We wanted to be sure that we had adequate, safety measures in place for our students. So really where we are now, we have very, very high degree of confidence in our testing partners and the availability that we have there. We have certainly seen a spike in COVID cases nationally, which is true, but we also have the benefit of our own experiences this fall and the experiences of other colleges on how they have handled those cases and what they have done with students to sort of try to mitigate that risk. I recognize that while college students are generally, they generally suffer the least bad consequences, that is not true for all of our students. And that is a challenge. And we need to consider, how do we manage in an area where this disease affects people disproportionately? Some of our students would have a higher potential for a bad outcome. So we feel like what we've done is, we've gotten good testing partners. We've got good strategies in place for the community health aspect that our students are going to have to buy into. And that we have the experience that we ourselves have had and other schools have had that give us a confidence that we'll be able to do this in the spring.
Can you talk a little bit more, Annette, about the plan for quarantine and how students would be quarantined, how many rooms we have available? And then if you could also talk a little bit about this concept of shutting down. I think that it did exist, but maybe you could expand on that.
Sure. So, one of the things actually that is different that we should acknowledge is in the summer, the state government actually asked us to have a plan under which we would sort of send students home. That was part of the planning process that all colleges went through. And probably after a few colleges started to send students home en masse, I think the recognition was that's not a great idea. Like, it is not a good idea if you have a COVID outbreak on your campus to now be sending students all over the country back to their home communities, not knowing if they're carrying COVID back with them. So really the direction we have now is your plans need to include your ability to care for the entire number of students that you would bring back, even if you have a significant COVID outbreak. So while we may actually move to a situation, and I don't want to mislead people that this might not happen, it has happened at a number of institutions where we have to say, hey, you know what, we have to stop in-person classes, we have to do this for a period of time. We have built and are continuing to build all of the mechanisms that we would need in place, up to and including how we would get our entire community food and take care of them if they all needed to stay in their residence halls. Do I expect that to be the kind of thing that would happen? No, but I think you want me to expect all of the things could potentially happen and be planning for all of those. So how we work quarantine and isolation is, a student who tests positive immediately moves into isolation housing. Isolation housing is really a sort of a thing unto itself. There are only students in those residence halls who have had a positive COVID test. They are followed up with daily by the health center. They're delivered food. We are, monitoring those students fairly carefully. Quarantine students, those are people who have been exposed to someone who has COVID, but do not yet have either a positive COVID test themselves nor have any symptoms. And for this fall semester, we have been having those students quarantine in place because everybody is in their own room. We have the ability to add to our number of beds and have actually done that to account for needing more quarantine space when we have people with roommates, right? So if your roommate is going into quarantine, you're probably not really going to want to quarantine with them. Although, if your roommate has tested positive for COVID, you are most likely going to end up needing to quarantine. So those things I think are the, the sort of differentiating factors for us. We've added beds. We've got over 100 beds now. We are looking at an additional 100. We have used upwards of about 80 beds at a time. So we are adding to that. But most colleges, including colleges that have all their students back, 2,000 to 3,000 population, have between 100 and 250 beds, because you're not typically using them all at the same time. But, the Lehigh Valley is a great place for us to be. There's a lot of hotels here. We have a lot of capacity to add if we needed to. And if we did have students in hotels, we'd still be delivering them food. We'd still be providing oversight to them. So they would not be out there on their own.
Annette, questions around extracurricular activities, what students will be doing on campus, as well as spaces that they can study. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, the library's been open this fall, and we actually had a lot of the academic buildings open for students to study, and we would, of course, continue to do that. I think students find little places that they really like to be in to study, and that's where they go. But and some students actually are going out of their room, even when their classes are remote, are going out of their room to take their class for a change of scenery or some other reason. For us, I'm sorry, I lost the other question, Amir. I was.
Me too, Annette. I think it was study spaces, and then. Oh, how about the gym? Is the gym going to be open? That seems to be a
the gym is open now. It is, you have to sign up for time. And that leads into the question that you were going to ask me that I'll remember, which is about extracurricular.
That's it. Nailed it.
The fitness center is open. And we also have, obviously, the strength training center for our athletes is open under pretty close supervision. There are times for students to participate in activities. They need to be wearing masks. Some of our intramural programs have, will be able to run. We've been doing a nice Thursday night lights program where students are down on Fisher Field doing some things, very distanced, of course. But really, for the majority of our extracurricular activities, and this was true for the fall and it will remain true for the spring, signature programs and ways that students are getting into leadership opportunities. The Student Involvement Office has indicated that those meetings will continue to mostly be held virtually. We don't want to exclude students who are home from those tracks of, being able to become a club president or doing other activity. But there are opportunities for students on campus. For example, right now in the fall, the Pottery Club was able to set up a little wheel down in the basement of Pardee and has been doing stuff because they've got some students on campus who are working on some things. So, there are opportunities, but I really want folks to get in their head that they're likely going to be pretty small in scale. It is really challenging to imagine the kind of large scale events that are typical with our semester and being able to sort of manage those with any degree of safety for the entire community.
All right, Ed, one more quick set of questions, and then I'll turn to John to give you a break. And that is really, they're around, so the three big ones, I think. Can you talk a little bit about what the quarantine looks like for a student, how they get their food, and the same relative question to isolation and how they get monitored. And then we'll circle back to traveling off campus one more time.
Sure. So students who are in isolation are monitored by the health center, and they've been mainly doing video visits with them. Our students have been largely asymptomatic in their, in their experiences with COVID. That doesn't mean that you can't have a bad outcome. We have seen several cases of college students really sort of trending downward quickly. So they do check on students every day. And food is delivered by dining services to those students in isolation every single day. Students can order the food, so they're getting, it's not just like, we threw some stuff in a bag and here it is. They're actually able to talk about the kinds of things that they want to eat and can have and, make them happy. The quarantine, we did give students an option, and some students have done this when they're in the contact tracing process. They can have a meal buddy. So some students who live in an off-campus place and one student is quarantining in a bedroom by themselves, their friends have been bringing them food. And that's fine. If students want to do that, it isn't required. We can get food to them as well. And again, we have all of these contact tracers and meal delivery folks. And I'll take this opportunity to give a pretty big shout out to the athletic staff, because this has been the double duty that many of our coaching staff have been doing, delivering meals and making sure that people are checked on, and doing all of that. And the other thing you wanted me to mention was
travel. So again, we've got just a couple more
Yes.
questions, and I think it's
Yes.
good to maybe touch on it just one more
Yeah.
time.
Yes.
Yes,
Yeah.
and will students be tracked if they travel? And will we allow any of it to go home?
Yeah, sure. So again, what we learned this fall is that we eliminated fall break for good reasons. We shortened up the semester by taking out fall break, but students actually needed a break. And many of them took it in the form of going home for a few days and spending some time with family. Tracking students is a tricky issue. So students have told us, I'm going home for this thing at this place. Sometimes some of their peers have suggested to us that that might not have been where they went. It's really pretty impossible for us to physically track where a student is going. So that has been, that has entered an element of risk into this. Right now, what students need to do is they email us and tell us where they're going. We check the COVID rates. We check the dates they're leaving, the dates they're coming back. They quarantine a little bit when they come back until they get a second test, and then a test from the health center, and then we're all good. In the spring, I do really need to say for a couple of weeks, we are unlikely to be able to let students do a lot of traveling, going back and forth to home or things like that. If we have good outcomes and if we can replicate the system that we have now, I'm certainly willing to do it. I think it is a little bit early for me to commit to that, given that we have no idea what the national or the regional or any other landscape is going to look like in January. But I can tell you, I understand that students want to be able to go home and visit with family and have a dinner and do those things. So we will build something that can help in that, but we all need to be flexible with what the world delivers us in terms of the experience of the disease.
Thank you. A question for the provost. Provost Meier, there are a couple of questions around whether or not seniors will be able to get the classes that they need. And specifically, if a student has registered, is planning on being on campus, registered for an in-person class, they need that class, and then circumstances change and they find out that they can't be in that class. Now what?
Yeah, so I think I'll say a few things about that. Yeah, the short version of that is if a senior needs a class to graduate, we're going to figure that out in almost every circumstance. I could conceive of something way out there that might just be too difficult for us to figure out, but really we're gonna do everything we possibly can to make that possible. There is a trickiness around if you are enrolled in a certain set of classes as an on-campus student and then need to do a study from home. Those we're gonna have to look at in a case-by-case situation. I think most of them are going to be easy to accommodate. I think everyone can imagine that, say, all right, we don't have a department of zoology, and I don't want to pick on a real department, but an advanced zoology course with a practicum component could be really well nigh impossible to pull off hitting the learning goals that are required, for instance, by an accrediting agency in that sort of situation. So I can't make an absolute blanket promise, but we will do everything we possibly can to accommodate students in that sort of situation. I am gonna take this opportunity too, Amir, to mention that it appears to me that the Spring 21 courses are actually live in Banner for anyone who wants to check. I just took a look, so maybe I've got special permission, but I don't think so. I think they're open for anyone to take a look at. And there was some question that had something to do with registration. You should have some information about that. If you don't have information about when your registration period is, go to the registrar's webpage. There's a very nice bit of information. Registration starts for seniors on November 4.
Excellent. John, it looks apparently that 200 people have left the webinar because, no, I'm just kidding.
I could believe it.
Everyone's excited to register for classes. President Byerly, do you have some general thoughts on what you're how you imagine the spring semester will go and some of the challenges that you see are out there and sort of the mindset that you hope families will be in as we return to our more on-campus population this spring?
Sure. I think you've gathered from what both Vice President Diorio and Provost Meier have said that, we're going to work hard to accommodate a wide range of circumstances, but, people will also have to be flexible in recognizing that there are some things that just won't work the way they normally do, or where the range of choices that you might normally have won't be available to you. That one of the things that we all have to recognize is that in order to make this work at all, certain constraints will be operative. Students will not have the range of activities that they would normally have. They will not have all of the freedoms that they would typically have. Just as we in the administration and faculty and staff, don't have the capacity to do all the things that we would normally be able to do in order to serve and prepare for the students. There are so many limits and constraints that I think that the main challenge that we will experience is probably a need to be patient with each other, and also to recognize that, as I think you heard from Annette Diorio's comments, policies might change, circumstances might change. We might say that travel is okay one week, and then we might say another week that travel is not okay. We might decide that there's a 2-week period, as Lehigh experienced a couple of weeks ago. They had a couple of weeks where they shut down all of their in-person classes, stopped all their athletic practices, and closed things down because they were dealing with a significant outbreak. And so that kind of flexibility has to be part of our thinking and part of our expectation. And I think we also have to recognize that, and I alluded to this in the beginning, that this really will rest on a shared commitment to trying to adhere to the safety protocols that are important. We will do our best to enforce ironclad rules. We will also offer lots of advice, suggestions, and pleas for you to do certain things in certain ways. We cannot be everywhere. We will not see everything that happens on this campus. Students will see each other more than we will see students. And we really rely on students to create an environment and, frankly, peer pressure that encourages everyone to make good choices, because the individual choices that you make, will have an impact on the entire community. And so we will do our very best, to create structures that promote adherence to all of these protocols. But people have to be realistic that we cannot be everywhere. We cannot see everything. We don't always have the reports and the information needed, to ensure that if something has gone wrong, we're able to address it. And so, we hope the community will take a lot of mutual responsibility too for keeping an eye out for each other, helping each other, but also nudging each other when necessary and saying, too many people in this room. I'm not going to stick around in this gathering. This is more people than you're supposed to have. Or, we're going into class and I don't see you wearing your mask. You better put your mask on. I know the professor is going to require that. Help each other out and encourage each other to follow the rules, because that really is going to be critical to our success. And finally, I'll say again that I hope that families will be supportive of that too. Vice President Diorio noted that everybody wants strong enforcement, but then when they're the person who's been accused of an infraction, they don't feel so strongly about wanting to see consequences. We ask parents to encourage students to follow the rules. If there's a 2-week period where travel isn't allowed, don't invite them to come home for that 2-week period. That would be very helpful. I think that we all want to make as many accommodations as we can for the individual circumstances of students, because we know it's difficult and stressful to be studying in this period of time. But at the same time, we also have to ask everyone to be respectful of each other and the community standards that will make this work for everyone, and that will keep the community safe. So we're prepared to adjust, evolve, be flexible, change as needed, and we hope the rest of the community will be as well.
Thank you. We do have a couple of late-breaking questions here around registration, and I don't want to miss them. So if the provost is still available, I would love to ask him, how do students choose the courses? What's the recommended process if they have questions about what courses they need? And who should they talk to about registration?
Oh, that's great. So like I mentioned really quickly earlier on, all the academic advisors are going to be getting an email with a bunch of necessary information for them that goes out tomorrow. I would say there's no reason why a student should be shy. They should send an email to your advisor today. You may not get an answer until tomorrow when the advisor's got some information in hand, but that is the very first place to start. If you know that you've got a favorite professor or a course that you've really been counting on, you can contact them as well. But I would say the advisor ought to be the primary person that you're working with through this process.
Okay. And then one or two more for Vice President Diorio. Can you talk a little bit about how closely related is our testing plan for the fall going to be to the spring? Or what will our testing plan in the spring be for our students?
Okay. Thank you. So I saw a couple of those questions myself. So again, some of the key changes from the fall to the spring, we're adding a pre-arrival test and we're adding several levels of population testing for the first couple of weeks of school. And then we're backing that down to monitoring. That monitoring testing will not be less than 15%. We've gotten advice from infectious disease specialists in both our local hospital networks and the state about a percentage that works. If we see, and again, right now we're seeing the case counts are going up, around the country. If those continue to climb, we may want to adjust that percentage of students we're testing every week up. So we're committing to the bottom of it. We're not committing to what the final percentage will be. But again, 15% is more than twice what sort of epidemiologically could work. We have been weighting our tests. They are not completely random. So we've been weighting the tests to hit more off-campus students because that's consistently, again, where colleges have shown that there is some risk there. We might change that weighting again once we get students back and have them in double rooms. We might be weighting it a little bit differently. We're also looking at some other monitoring mechanisms that may offer some insight. But we have found that schools that have tried to use some of these other wastewater monitoring, some other things, that really can result in a lot of extra quarantining for students. So we'd rather, sort of focus on the testing, the individual and or pooled testing strategies that we have, rather than try to sort of, shut down residence hall for a couple of weeks because there's a small amount of COVID test in a wastewater sample. So we've been exploring all those options. We feel confident that the testing is the PCR testing is the right way to continue going, and we'll have that be at least 15%.
Thank you. And then last one is around, can students, thinking about just Easton and being able to travel into Easton or the grocery store, you just make one more reminder for people like how we're thinking about that process?
Yep. I think really the key for us to understand is that right now our county COVID rate is in a it's in a good place. So it's a good place. It's relatively stable. Last spring, when we had, sort of COVID rates in our county and in others that were very high, we told our students they couldn't go to the grocery store either. Might we be in that situation where we would be telling students they need to stay on campus because, them off campus and it is riskier than keeping them on? It could be. But I imagine we will be able to permit local travel within the county for students to be able to sort of go to CVS, go to the grocery store, do those things that they normally do, assuming the world doesn't take a turn that is, dramatic in the coming months. If it does, we would be trying to sort of maintain that closed circuit mentality and know that when you're investing in a lot of testing for your population, you want to do everything you can to sort of limit the interactions with the folks outside your testing bubble.
Excellent. I'd like to see if Director of Parent Relations, Amy Blythe, is still around. And maybe, Amy, you could talk a little bit about how parents can continue to stay informed. And then I'd ask Allison Byerly to just talk a little bit about the survey towards the end, just how we were trying to collect that information and what's left before we wrap up. So, Amy, how do parents really and students and families stay in the know?
Yes, so I will continue to share information with you in a timely manner. And so keep an eye on the point newsletters that you receive via email. If you're not receiving those, then there is a form on the families.lafayette.edu website where you can share preferred contact information or change your preferred contact information. In addition, the website families.lafayette.edu has a lot of resources there, and I try and link to other areas on the Lafayette website where you can find information. Of course, the current FAQ page is the best resource for everyone, parents, families, everyone in the community, because as things get updated, changed, added, that information all goes there. So please be keeping an eye on that. If there's information that you're not finding, you can reach out to my office. There's also an email address set up for suggestions and questions that's together at lafayette.edu, or you can email parents at lafayette.edu, and the phone numbers are on the family's website as well. So, hopefully this information, as well as last week's town hall and last week's phone line, has helped share as much as we know right now, and we will continue to share as we go along.
Thanks, Amy. President Byerly, if you could just talk a little bit about our timeline going forward and how we plan to continue to release information and maybe just clear up, there were some questions around whether or not people had to identify their survey by November 2nd, letting us know that they were interested in studying from home, and sort of what does that mean for students and families?
Sure, absolutely. One of the things that we've really tried to bear in mind is that people want as much information as possible before making choices. But of course, information continues to evolve. And so, we've been trying to link these processes, and we've tried to create a timeline that does not require, that allows for as much information as possible before kind of major commitments are made. So for example, the survey that we have sent out to students asking them to identify by November 2nd, whether they think they're going to study from home or whether they expect to be on campus, or actually it technically says, are you studying from home? We assume that you're going to be on campus unless you use the survey to notify us you're thinking that you'd study from home. That's really meant for planning purposes so that we can, plan appropriate curriculum, make sure we have adequate housing. That's not an individually binding commitment, and it certainly precedes any, tuition, room and board payments being due. And so, you're not being asked to individually commit yourself in a completely binding way. We're simply asking for the best information possible from students so that we can plan appropriately, because we want to make sure that we are serving the students who are studying from home as well as the students who are studying from campus. And so the way in which we'll use that information, as the provost indicated, will have an impact on adjustments to the course schedule. Even the course schedule that has just gone live will change in the coming weeks, because if we find out, for example, that there are many students planning to study from home who might need a particular course, that might dictate changing a course from in-person to remote or creating a remote section of a course. We'll try and make all of those adjustments in order to serve the needs of students as best we can. And so, all we ask is that people make a good faith effort to give us the best information possible, knowing that your personal circumstances might change. And of course, the national environment could change in a way that impacts your own sense of, your own kind of risk tolerance. In the end, we want everyone to pick, to make the choices that are most comfortable for you and your family. We want people whose own personal risk tolerance would dictate studying from home to study from home and have a good experience there. We want students who are comfortable coming to campus to come to campus, but also understand what the campus experience will look like, what we can offer, what we can't offer, and come here knowing this is the experience kind of that you're signing up for. So we really are striving for truth in advertising as much as possible. A lot of things will change and information will be updated, but we are trying to be as straightforward as we can possibly be in giving you a sense of what each of these options will look like and what we think the semester will look like, so everyone can make the best choice possible.
Well, thank you very much. As this does conclude our webinar tonight, and this will be posted tomorrow, and I appreciate everyone's time.
Thanks everyone for joining us. Have a good evening.